All right, you know what,
Yeah.
we might as well kick this off, and I would like to do this with an acknowledgement of country. We would like to acknowledge that this meeting is being held on the traditional lands of a variety of proud Aboriginal tribes. We pay our respects to Indigenous elders past, present, and emerging. We recognize that sovereignty was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So welcome to our EMDG webinar. For those who don't know me, my name is Jens, and I'm IGEA's Director of Industry Member Relations. In the role, I act as a linchpin between our association and Australian game developers, to see how we can best support them by means of research, advocacy, or other means, this being a very good example of that. And for those who don't know who or what IGEA is, we're the peak industry association for the video games industry in Australia and New Zealand. So the EMDG, the Export Market Development Grant, it is a key Australian government financial assistance program for Australian exporters. And each year, in theory, at least, it helps Australian small and medium enterprises to start or expand their export business. And that includes game developers. It does provide targeted financial assistance for promotional activities, as well as the development of marketing skills, and you can receive up to 50% back on eligible marketing and promotional activities, and that includes overseas expos, for example. But at the same time, I found that not everybody in the games industry is across this ultimately very useful scheme, and even if you are, the guidelines have a tendency to constantly shift around. The third round of the EMDG has opened today, and again, it's slightly different to the previous rounds. So to demystify the program and the process, I'm joined today by Warren Cross, CEO and Legal Counsel at Export Incentives, who are a trusted partner of IGEA-member Nagle Accounting. But before I hand over to Warren, just a couple of words regarding the format of this. It is the usual. We're going to give a small presentation. Warren's going to talk about some of the basics. So while we're doing that, please make sure you mute yourself and turn off your video. Once that's over, there'll be an opportunity to ask some questions. So feel free to ask the questions in the chat, or if you're brave enough, feel also free to unmute yourself, put yourself in video, and ask them directly. And well, I guess that's it. Warren, over to you. I'm just going to share the slides as well, so that we can go through those. I hope you can all see those.
Yep. So thanks, Jens. So
no worries.
The format is I'll quickly run through the scheme, and then I think let's open for questions after I've done a quick run through. So basically, the current scheme, the rebate, the 50% cash rebate applies from the first dollar you spend. It's run by Austrade. As I say, there's no, in the slide, there's no minimum grant amount. And the maximum annual grant at the moment is $28,000, but due to an excess of applications over available funds, that may drop. I'm advising my clients currently, I think the maximum grant will be about 25 grand. So to get 25 grand, you need to have spent 50. Yeah, okay. So you don't have to be currently exporting. You can be looking to export, or you can be currently exporting, but the critical thing is you've got to be exporting an Australian developed product. That's a key part. You've got to hold an ABN, you've got to be registered with the ATO, maximum turnover 20 million. Now, this is a bit of a key point too. A video game is technically under the Copyright Act computer software, which means you either, under the legislation, have to own the copyright or have an exclusive license of the copyright. You can't just hold a marketing right. So that is a critical point. Okay, we go to the next slide. So, I mean, basically, how the scheme currently works is you've got to pre-register. So the registration opens today. It's open for about a month. And then that will enable you to incur expenses after the 1st of July 2023. So you then incur expenses over the course of that year, and then you can apply for a rebate. I'll come back to that point because if you're not currently exporting, you qualify under Tier 1, and that may be relevant to getting an early payment. So most of your marketing expenses qualify, including travel. The main exclusion are salaries and commissions. So typical cost would be your airfare. You get $350. I've done a typo there. It's $350 a day for your accommodation and the per diems, trade fairs, websites, trademark patents, promotional material, marketing consultants, overseas sales officers. So basically anything you pay to a third party that constitutes marketing would qualify. One point I didn't have there is that if you are doing marketing which is aimed both at the Australian market and the international market, then you'll need to come up with some form of apportionment as to what proportion of that cost can be applied to the international market. We'll go to the next. So, okay, so there's 3 tiers into this scheme. Tier 1 is you've never exported before, but you're ready to export. Maximum grant currently $10,000. You have to demonstrate the appropriate skills to undertake export marketing, which is effectively just doing an online seminar through Austrade, fairly straightforward. And you can, in that tier, you can undertake export training. Now, unlike Tier 2 and Tier 3, where you have to spend the money over the entire financial year and then apply for the rebate, Austrade's policy has been in respect to Tier 1 to actually pay that shortly after you lodge the application, within 3 months of lodging the application. So, but that is only where you've never exported and are looking to export. We'll go to the next one. So if you are currently exporting, then you either qualify under Tier 2 or Tier 3. Tier 2 is where you're looking to expand. You're currently exporting, looking to expand. Austrade need evidence of a recent export sale, and that maximum grant there is $18,000. Looking to expand means that you're not just standing still, you're looking to develop additional export markets, additional countries, additional products, that sort of thing. Now, where it gets complicated is the next slide, which is Tier 3. Now, Tier 3 is, again, where you're looking to expand, but you're looking also to make a strategic shift. Now, most people who are looking to broaden their client base into new markets would qualify into Tier 3. The significance of Tier 3 is the current maximum grant's $28,000 as opposed to the $18,000 in Tier 2. So again, they need evidence of a recent sale. So yeah, just repeating, a strategic shift is either opening up a new market, a new country, or marketing a new product in general terms. They're the 2 key points normally in Tier 3. So how do you register? Well, you've got to pre-register with Austrade from now to April 14. You've got to fill out a plan to market. That sets out your export strategy and also what export promotion costs you intend to incur over the next 2 financial years. Although Austrade's guidelines released today seem to indicate they're only looking for 1 year's worth of expenses because there'll be a review of the scheme next year. So you also need to, you've got to lodge with Austrade a profit and loss and balance sheet. So that's probably where, you can't get away from that. You've got to have a P&L, you've got to have a balance sheet, and you've got to have been filing or intend to file tax returns. If you've been trading, then you need to have tax returns, and you need, and for all the registrations, you're going to need a MyGov ID. And that can be a little tricky, but that's just the way it is. If you don't already have a MyGov ID and you want to lodge a claim, that's the first thing I'd be getting onto, because that can take a little while to get through. Okay, so when do you get the cash? So if you're Tier 2 and Tier 3, that is you're a current exporter, then you need to incur the expenses over the 23-24 financial year. And then at the end of that year, you then lodge a milestone report, which is a report setting out what you've actually spent. And normally you'd get your rebate within 30 days of that milestone report being accepted. Now, with Tier 1, Austrade's policy may be to pay it upon receipt of your plan to market. So that's, but bear in mind with Tier 1, the maximum grant's $10,000. Currently, that could drop a little, but I'd say it'll stay around about that mark. So just to reiterate again, with Tier 1, You can't have had any export sales to date. And when I say any, like any at all. You then need to, do some an online webinar with Austrade just to make sure that you understand, how to export. It's pretty straightforward. Now, so I'm just reiterating again in terms of the bureaucratic side of the scheme. You've got to have a profit and loss for any tier. You've got to have a balance sheet for any tier. You've got to have a MyGov ID for any tier. And the significance of the profit and loss is to show that your turnover is less than $20 million. So I assume that's not going to be an issue for too many people. But yeah, without that, you can't get through the system. I think that's a quick. So that's a quick run through.
That's a quick run through. And look, Warren, thank you so much. We're gonna go back to the slide where we talk about your company before we finish this off. But we do have a couple of comments in the chat. Before we go there, there is a question that I had, a thought that came to my mind. The video games industry is by its very nature a global industry. So, the language of the EMDG is sort of very aligned with traditional exports of, I don't know, coal, groceries, whatever it is. And so, by default, every video game developer will have exported a game into another country by means of a platform like Steam, for example, or, other digital storefronts. Does that automatically lift them to tier 2?
Yeah, there's no dollar amount on the level of export. So if you've had any export sales, the only market excluded is New Zealand. So if you've had any export sales to any part of the world excluding New Zealand, you are into tier 2 and tier 3. Now that's got an advantage and you get more money, but it's got a disadvantage and you have to wait to the end of the year to apply. But any exports, then you can't apply under tier 1.
Yeah, there you go. So that's something to keep in mind because, like I said, the Australian market for the games industry is comparatively small, and it is an industry that is very global, but by its very nature. When you release a game on Steam, it's all of a sudden accessible to the whole planet, and that's the idea. All right, well, let's have a look at some of the questions in the comments here. So the first one is coming from Matt, and Matt is asking, this may be covered later, but what about companies providing a service in the games industry applicable to the rebate? For example, we're a games audio studio, like we provide services to the games industry by helping them with their audio. Are we eligible as well?
Not if you're providing those services to an Australian company. So you've got to be in a direct relationship with an exporter. So if you were commissioned by an overseas studio, for example, to produce a game for them, that would be eligible. But if you are providing services to Australian companies, then you're not the exporter. Same issue came up in the film industry, because in the film industry you've got a lot of studio facilities and things, and yeah, in general terms, no, unless you're contracting directly with an overseas company.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Good question here from Jason. So regarding tier 3 versus tier 2, if we are, for example, currently exporting to the US but want to open up a new market such as the UK via increasing marketing spend on Google Ads in that region, would only the costs incurred in the marketing in the UK be eligible in this instance for tier 3, or can we blend both US and UK marketing costs together to up the spend?
Yeah, you can claim all your marketing costs, not just the ones aimed at the additional market. So, I mean, as long as you can establish some sales in a new market, that you haven't previously exported to, you'd usually be able to qualify for tier 3. I would advise people because most of our work's in intellectual property and in the entertainment industry. So the same thing, most people are focused on the world, not just Australia. So I would encourage most people to apply under tier 3. There's no downside. In the worst case scenario, they might knock you back to tier 2, but I'd go under tier 3 every time. you should be able to find a new market somewhere that you've opened up over the course of that year.
That's it. Reach for the stars.
Yeah. Well, particularly if you're online, there'll be some new sales coming from somewhere in the world that you haven't sold to before.
Yeah, good call. Madeline is asking, would money paid to an independent marketer located in Australia qualify?
Yeah, provide marketing consultants qualify as long as they're at arm's length of the company. That is, they're not, effectively working for the company, but they've got their own ABN. They need to have a number of clients, so they need to be at arm's length of the company.
Yeah, that makes sense. In terms of salaries being excluded. Zira is asking, and this sort of somewhat relates to the plan to market, does the expense have to be inclusive of everything? Or can it be anticipated expense for traveling to places, say Gamescom, which is taking place in Cologne in Germany, or with an accepted in-kind investments for materials, business cards, posters. Therefore, there is no need to figure out what percentage is spent for overseas marketing.
Yeah, look, they've designed this system that encourages you to be overly generous in what you think you're going to claim, because you can always reduce the amount that you actually claim from Austrade, but you can never increase it. So we always encourage our clients to overestimate what they're going to spend, because there's no downside. So just put in a lump sum figure, and when it comes time to claim it, then you can work out the specifics. So I wouldn't lose too much sleep over, you can put whatever amount you want in there, to be perfectly honest, because as long as it's reasonable and it looks reasonable, because halfway through the year, one of your games might take off and suddenly you're spending a lot more money than you thought you were going to spend. So that's sort of the problem with the way this scheme's been designed in respect to the entertainment industry, because we all know, something can happen out of the blue that turns everything on its head, and you suddenly got to start spending money you never thought you were going to have to spend.
Yeah, look, good call. And, in the preparation for this webinar, Warren and I discussed this plan to market that you have to fill out. It's like, maybe we could talk about that. But the challenge with that is, as Warren pointed out, it's hard to generalize. It's for each sort of studio to come up with their own plan. Austrade can somewhat help with that. But, Warren, is it fair to generally say that as long as it makes sense, you can put it in there? As long as it
we've never had a plan to market questions because, obviously we make sure they make sense. But, as long as it makes sense and you're not intending to, you can't just put in a plan saying, I'm going to market to New Zealand because New Zealand's an excluded body, or I'm going to market something that's illegal. So as long as what you're doing is legal, as long as what you're doing is aimed at the world excluding Australasia, and as long as it looks reasonable, then, it should fly straight through.
Yeah. And look, that is also commensurate with my experience, because I worked on the plan to market for IGEA, which as a peak industry body is also eligible for the EMDG. So we successfully claimed that. And it was very much along those lines. This is what we're planning on doing at, say, GDC or at Gamescom. Here are some estimated costs, here are some estimated activities. But as you can appreciate, some of those things change, for example, with regards to getting, say, funding from state governments, and then your expenses are reduced, and you can claim less, which perfectly fine, because we got the money from another government agency. But it is a fast changing industry, so I guess do your best, and as long as it makes sense, it'll be fine. All right. Do we have? Okay, you froze there for one word. All right, let's.
It froze. Yeah. Did that point about double dipping? Did that get frozen, or did that come through?
I think that got frozen. Maybe just in case. Repeat it.
Just so everyone knows, so no one gets themselves into a pickle. You can't double dip. That is, if you get money from say a grant from a state arts body or a state body, you can't then claim it under the export grant scheme as well. Just so you're clear on that.
Yeah, that's right. So Australia will, for example, ask us, did you receive any funding from state governments? Well, like, yeah, we did. It's like, all right, no, sorry, we're not going to cover those expenses, which, you know what, fair enough. I mean, it's got to draw the line somewhere, of course. And Paulina is asking a question, is it eligible to use this scheme to offset our publishers' marketing spend?
So these marketing costs that are being deducted out of your royalties, is that what we're talking about?
And Paulina, feel free to unmute yourself. It may be a bit easier to discuss
because
this.
Yes, okay. Yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier. Where you've got costs that are being incurred by a third-party distributor on your behalf and are being deducted out of your share of royalties, then you can claim those costs upon them actually being deducted. So you might have a distributor that says, look, we're going to spend 20 grand on marketing, and you have to bear 50% of that. Then your 50% share, when it's deducted from your royalties, will be eligible to be claimed, but you make sure you run it through your profit and loss statement. So in your profit and loss statement, you'd have to take it up as income, the royalties, and then deduct it off as an expense. Otherwise, you're not putting it through your books. If that makes sense, Jens.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Let us know if it doesn't make sense to you. Elizabeth is asking, can I, as a studio director, apply on behalf of my company, or does a particular person in the company need to apply?
Oh, no, as long as, normally it would be, either a director of the company or a financial controller, but, it's got to be obviously someone authorised by the company to apply on their behalf.
Yeah, cool. That makes sense.
Director, company secretary, financial controller would be the usual three that, and outside of that, I think Austrade may question whether if you had authority in writing, but at the end of the day, the money's being paid to the company, and the directors would need to be aware that the application's being made and consent to it.
Yeah, it would look a bit weird too if the intern did it.
Yeah.
Zier is just asking something about the T1 tier. To clarify, I believe you mentioned that you can apply for it before the expense. If that is the case, what happens if you spend less than anticipated? Do you simply return the money, or am I wrong in thinking that T1 level is paid beforehand? It is paid beforehand, but yeah,
look, we have got clients that are in that situation, and Austrade haven't asked for the money back yet. Now, the reason for that is that the original round 1 and 2 were for a longer periods of time. Round 1 was for 3 years, round 2 was for 2 years, round 3 is for 1 year. So if you don't spend the money within that 1 year, there may be a possibility that Austrade will ask for the money back because it's only a 1 year period. There's no, but, to be perfectly frank, a lot of the rules regarding this scheme are being made up as they go along. So I can only talk in general terms about, whether, but it'd be fair to say that if you don't keep exporting and you don't keep filing milestone reports under the new scheme that'll come in for round 4, whenever that is, then yeah, there may be an issue there.
Yeah, that is indeed all a bit up in the air. Teresa is asking, is there a cap on each international flight? For example, can you claim an expensive business class costs, but also economy flights have increased exponentially? Traveling is expensive. Can we cover it?
Yeah, no, the only cap is, first class is out, or you can claim 65% of first class, but business class is fine. And in respect of the accommodation, as I say, it's capped at $350 per day, but that's per person. So you're entitled to take 5 people to a market if you've got the ability to do that.
Yeah. Zier is just wanting to clarify something regarding the double dipping that we've discussed earlier. Is that specifically asking for export-related activities, or is that regarding any funding at all? Where do we draw the line?
Well, it would need to be, it would need to be a grant that you've received for the export activity to be a double dip. So if you've received a grant to run your company and you choose to apply some of that to export, in general terms, and I mean, obviously, I need to. I'm not seeing the actual language in the document, but in general terms, that would be okay.
Yeah.
To then apply for the rebate because you've had a discretion. But if you get a specific grant for export, then clearly you can't then claim that expense twice.
Yeah, and that relates to a question that Elizabeth put here in the chat as well. So if we have a benefit from the government for non-marketing or export costs, like a grant from big screen, we're ineligible. So I guess
only for that expense though. Yeah.
So it's very, very narrow in that sense.
Yeah.
Anna is asking, are there any other export grants we can apply for in addition to the EMDG? And this is coming from a mobile game developer.
No, Austrade. Well, there's trade start, but that's fairly small amounts. But the export grant scheme's the main scheme. I assume everyone is aware of the R&D scheme as well. That there may be some benefits under R&D, but that's through Oz Industry, not through Austrade.
Yeah, good point. And that's a whole process in itself. So Anna, if you're interested in that, let me know. We do have people among our members who can help you with that as well. And in addition, I would encourage you to have a look at the various support mechanisms that may be available in your state. For example, these screen agencies tend to have travel grants. That's certainly the case for Victoria, for South Australia, WA, for Queensland. So something that would be covered by the EMDG to an extent is sometimes covered by the screen agencies as well. So a lot of people who go to GDC enjoy the benefit of a travel grant. So have a look at that. And also have a look at the IGEA investment resource, which lists all the support mechanisms that are currently available for game developers in Australia. And Tim is asking a question, are applications per company or per project? For example, we have multiple games that we export globally.
Per legal entity. I'm not sure. Yeah, so per legal entity, but I'm not sure what structures you're using because the offset now applies to video games, doesn't it, Jens?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so I'm not exactly sure how you're structuring it, but for example, in the film industry, what they do is when they're making a feature film, they'll have a new entity for that particular film. So they'll have normally what's the production company that claims the offset, and then they'll have a holding company that then gets an exclusive license or copyright to market the intellectual property. Now, because that's a separate legal entity, separate to the parent company, yes, in that instance, there can be a separate claim.
Yeah, there you go. So we may have to restructure your company a bit. And there's another tip we can learn from the movie industry.
You can't restructure for the benefit of obtaining a grant, but I assume you're restructuring for other business reasons.
Absolutely. I mean,
sorry, I'm being recorded here, so I got to play straight bat.
Yeah. No, fair enough.
Yeah.
All right. Well, currently there are no more questions in the chat, but I mean, look, one of the reasons why I wanted to raise this in time, because the third round has opened today. You have 4 weeks, and that would get you ready in time, for example, for Gamescom in Cologne in August. And I really wanted to make sure it is on your radar. I mean, Warren Trade Fairs, that's covered by the EMDG as well, isn't it? So
yeah. But that's the key point to remember. Under this scheme, it's a 2-step process. Step 1 is you've got to register. And then step 2 is you start incurring expenses from 1 July. I won't talk about the old scheme. It'll just confuse things. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. So if you are planning on traveling to Gamescom or GDC next year, definitely consider the scheme, because it is certainly handy to have 50% off. And like I said, we as a trade body have benefited from it. So I would very much encourage you to look into that. Also, I mean, if you're wondering why Warren is on here, why is he in a good position to help you? Well, this is who export incentives are and what they do. Warren, do you quickly want to cover that?
Yeah. So, this originally was part of my legal practice. My legal practice was in intellectual property. So I've sort of pioneered the scheme in the, particularly the music industry, the film industry, intellectual property generally. So, I got involved originally because people were lodging applications being knocked back and couldn't understand why. With the current scheme, it'd be fair to say that the government's inherited a rewrite of the legislation that occurred under the former government, but it's ended up with a situation where instead of the maximum grant being 150,000, which was what was promised when the new legislation went through, it's dropped to 25, currently 28, it could be 25. So I think you'll see some fairly major changes happening next year, because the way the scheme has been administered has ended up making a scheme way more complicated than perhaps it needs to be. But yeah, I mean, if you decide that, you want some advice, then by all means, contact us and we can help. But, it'd be fair to say that the new scheme, once you get through all the hurdles that are at the beginning, then after that, it's not quite as complicated as it sounds. But there are a few hurdles at the front end that you need to get through.
Yeah, that's right. And look, we as an industry body also use the services of somewhat similar to Warren, that really helps. So if you're looking into that and if you're struggling, that's something I'd encourage you to look into. We do actually have another question in the chat here from Zia, who is asking, so just to confirm, this does not require incorporation, just an ABN.
That's right. Yeah. So it can be an individual, can be a partnership, can be a company, as long as you've got an ABN and you're a legal entity, which as an individual you are. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, do we have any further questions? Comments? Anything that's unclear?
So if anyone thinks of something after the event and they're not quite sure, feel free to contact my office. I've got a team that work with me. I do the advice work, but I've got a team that work with me on the processing side. They've been with me for 20 years. So they're very helpful as well. So you might just think of something as soon as the conference ends, you think, oh, hang on, I should have asked that. So feel free to contact us. As I say, we don't charge anything for our advice. It's only if you decide that you want to use us to take you right through the process that we then work on a small percentage of what you receive. Yep. Yeah.
And I would really encourage you to try and do this. Once you get your head around it, it is relatively straightforward. Yes, there is some uncertainties. You're like, ooh, my plan might change. Put what you think at this point in time, is what you think you're going to do to the best of your knowledge. Plans change, businesses change, and so on. I think that is recognized. Put in the information in that you have available. On the basis of that, proceed on that. There is, again, Pat is asking, and we touched on this before, this grant can't be used with any other grant. Well, I mean, Warren, correct me if I'm wrong here, it can be used. I mean, you're still eligible for other grants, but if you get a grant that is export related, then you can't double dip.
The other grant's got to be specifically for export. So if you get a state grant, for example, or Screen Australia give you a travel grant, then you can't then claim. What you do is you look at the cost of the trip, you deduct off the grant, and if there's any deficit after that, well, you can claim the deficit, but you can't claim the whole lot.
Yeah, and to illustrate this by another example, I didn't mention this before, so we got very generous support from various state governments for the Australian stand at Gamescom last year. So we can't claim that, so if Australia is going to look into that, like, well, so you're trying to claim the construction of the Australian stand, but ultimately that has been covered by other financial support. No, we can't do that. That would be double dipping. And you know what? Fair enough.
Yeah. Now, one point I forgot, Jens, is to let everyone know that this grant is deemed to be taxable income. So you have to, whatever grant you get, you have to take it up in your tax return. The ATO will chase people if they see the grant has not been taken up in their tax return. So just so you're aware of that.
Back in Texas.
Yeah.
Always count on those. Anna is actually a question. Is the process for claiming very involved?
Look, I'd have to say that the new scheme has got aspects to it that are much more complicated than the old scheme, and it's got some aspects to it that are less complicated. Probably the less complicated part is the amount of paperwork you need to justify the expenses you've incurred. That part is probably less complicated, but you have got these registration processes, you've got, milestone reports, you've got, I think there's a lot more paperwork involved in this scheme, even though, the intention was to reduce the amount of paperwork. So, it just comes down to, look, if you're fairly, if you're fairly organised, you should be okay. It's only if you are very busy, and so most of our clients would be clients that just want to outsource it because it's one less thing they have to worry about. Because people tend to want to maximise the use of their time. So that's normally where we get involved, where someone says, look, I've got enough on my plate, I'm flat out, I'm developing games, I don't want to worry about trying to get through all this paperwork. I'd rather just pay someone to do it, and I know it's done, and I know I'm getting everything I'm entitled to. Because probably knowing what you can claim and maximising your claim is probably the area where it can be advantageous to use someone who's been doing it for a very long time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as Warren said, if you're organized, that really helps. Like, keep your accounts in order. They, as an Austrian, will ask for a milestone report, which is exactly that. What have you done up until this point? What are your expenses? Can you prove them? So make sure that you keep all the evidence of your spending, and make sure that all of those accounts are in order. It will really help with the process. Yeah,
probably one point, Lens, that we skipped over that people need to think about is, because this comes up in all entertainment industries, is, for example, a website. I suppose a lot of people are constructing their own website so they can't claim it. But if you're doing a website that from day one is, and you are born global from day one, and I assume most of you are, a lot of the expenses you incur are being incurred for the world, not just for Australia. So some of those expenses would be able to be claimed on an apportioned basis. For example, in the music industry, Australia represents 3% of the world market. So sometimes, you might find that quite a high percentage of some of these expenses that are applicable to the world may in fact be claimable at a fairly high percentage.
There you go. That makes good sense.
Yep.
All right. Any more questions, comments? How do we get in contact with Warren? I can share his contact details with you. I can also put them in the chat right now. If you just give me one moment, just bear with me. Right, let's paste in the email here. So there you go. And we will also put the recording on our website. So, you can always re-watch this. I'm also going to put my contact details in there in case you have any questions about any further support mechanisms that go beyond the EMDG, such as, things that are offered in the various Australian states. So there it is. Pretty straightforward, jens@igea.net.
Well, good luck, everyone, with your exports.
Yeah, look, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all your questions. And again, you know, I know I said it before, but I'll say it again. Have a look at this scheme. I know Export Market Development Grant doesn't really sound super sexy, but believe me, it is very, very useful, in particular for smaller studios and studios that are just starting up. You know, if you're planning on going to conferences, if you're planning on going to these GDC, Gamescom, all of that, it will be a significant help. Those of you who are traveling to GDC will know how expensive accommodation flights are. So this will really seriously, you know, address that issue and yeah, just reduce the expenses by 50%. So, you know, have a look at it. It's incredibly useful. All right, everybody. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And, you know, I'll take advantage of it, and I hope to see as many of you as possible overseas. And thank you so much, Warren, for your expert input and advice.
Yeah,
All right,
my pleasure.
everybody. Take care. Yeah. See you later. Bye.
Okay, bye.